In the following video, the complete Minnesota manual dexterity test will be implemented. The test was developed sometime prior to 1946, and this can be inferred due to the fact that the test has validity and reliability measures dated in 1943. Initially, the test was developed to provide employers with an instrument that would improve the efficiency of personnel selection for jobs requiring arm and hand dexterity. It can now also be used to assess adults who have suspect eye-hand, arm-hand, and gross motor coordination deficits that are secondary to neurological impairment. Within the assessment are 5 individual tests, which will be demonstrated by the therapist Troy and then completed by the client Ashley. The tests included are the placing test, turning test, displacing test, the one-hand turning and placing test, and the two-hand turning and placing test. Materials needed for this assessment are found in a portable kit. Within the kit, one will find 2 folding boards, 60 blocks, and an instruction manual. Along with the kit materials, clinicians should have a table between 28 inches and 32 inches in height, as well as a stopwatch and a score sheet specific to the assessment in order to record clients' completion times. The first test within the assessment is the placing test. The object of this test is to see how fast the client can put the blocks back into the holes with one hand. The beginning position for this test is shown in the provided picture. According to the manual, there should be 2 boards with holes in them, one being classified as the lower board and the other as the upper board. You can use your imagination to interpret that the lower board would be paired with the blocks that are standing alone and the blocks would be in the holes. The upper board would be the board shown that has the empty holes. The kit provided to us had 1 board, and this assessment technically does not need both boards to be completed. As you can see during this demonstration, the therapist demonstrates the task with their left hand so that the client can directly mirror with their right hand. During the demonstration, the therapist is making sure to show and let the client know that all blocks must be placed all the way down into the holes in the board. The client will begin by putting the bottom block in the top hole and the next block in the next hole, and so on until the entire board is complete. For the sake of time, the client only fills in half of the board for this demonstration. We also only show the client doing the test 1 time when in reality a therapist would have the client complete the test 2 to 4 times. Next is the turning test. The object is to see how fast one can turn the blocks over on the board. The beginning position for the turning test is displayed in the provided picture. If you have just administered the placing test, the board will already be set up for use with the client, due to all of the holes being filled with all of the blocks. The therapist will demonstrate this test for the client. As you can see, the therapist is using his right hand to pick up the block and then his left hand to place the block back in the hole. The instructions for this test include that if you are moving across the board to the right, you use your right hand to pick up the block and the left to place it down. If you are moving to the left, you use your left hand to pick up the block and your right to place it down. Client will begin by using their left hand to lift the block from the upper right hand hole, and with their right hand put the block back bottom side up into the same hole. As the client works back to the right on the next row down, the client picks the blocks up with the right hand and puts them back in the hole bottom side up with the left hand. Again, normally the client would complete the entire board and 2 to 4 trials would be done. Next is the displacing test. The object of this test is to see how fast one can move the blocks one at a time from one hole to another. The beginning position for the displacing test is displayed in the provided picture. If you have just administered the placing or turning test, the board will be ready to use. However, the therapist must remember to remove the block from the upper left corner and place it to the side before beginning the test. The therapist will demonstrate the test by moving the top block from the top left-hand corner. He will then use his left hand to execute the test so the client can mirror directly using their right hand. As the client begins, they will have been instructed to fill the top hole with the block below it, the next empty hole with the block just below, and keep on doing this until the bottom hole in the first column is empty. They will then fill the bottom hole with the bottom block in the second column. In this column, they will keep filling each empty hole with the block above it until the top hole is empty. Again, normally the client would complete the entire board and 2 to 4 trials would be done. Next is the one-hand turning and placing test. The object of this test is to see how fast you can put the blocks back into the holes, bottom side up, with one hand. The beginning position for the one-hand turning and placing test is displayed in the provided picture. As you can see, it is the same position that was used for the placing test. Remember, according to the manual, there should be 2 boards, but this test can be also administered with just one board provided. The therapist will demonstrate by using his left hand and starting on the right side of the board so that the client can mirror directly on their right side. The client will have been instructed to begin on the right side of the board using their right hand. The client will put the bottom block in the top hole, bottom side up, and the next block in the next hole, and so on until the board is completed. The therapist will have reminded the client to make sure that the blocks are placed upside down in the holes. The therapist can also let the client know that they can stabilize the board with their free hand. Again, normally the client would complete the entire board and 2 to 4 trials would be done. Lastly is the two-hand turning and placing test. The object of this test is to see how fast you can put the blocks back in the holes, bottom side up, 2 at a time, using both hands. The beginning position for the two-hand turning and placing test is displayed in the provided picture. As you can see, it is also the same position that was used for the placing test. Remember, according to the manual, there should be 2 boards, but this test can be administered with just one board provided as well. The therapist will demonstrate the test on the client's right side of the board so that the client can mirror directly when executing the test. The client will have been instructed to begin on the right side of the board using both hands. The client will put the 2 bottom blocks, one with each hand, into the 2 top holes, bottom side up, the next 2 blocks into the next 2 holes, and so on until the board is complete. The therapist will have reminded the client to make sure that all blocks are bottom side up and are placed all the way down in the hole. Again, normally the client would complete the entire board and 2 to 4 trials would be done. The last thing that will be covered in this video is the scoring process. The above picture is an example of the score sheet used for this assessment. Each test is listed with a place to record the time taken to complete each test for a trial run and each test after that. Anywhere from 2 to 4 tests can be administered by a clinician. The clinician would then total the number of seconds it takes to complete each trial of the test, enabling the obtainment of a raw score. An interpretation chart is provided in the instruction manual, which gives a descriptive interpretation of the scores, including their rating, percentile score, standard score, and Stenine score for individual testing. Thank you for listening to this video on the Cmdt assessment, and we hope that you learned a lot about the tool. Before you leave, we would like to remind you that for time's sake, we did not complete the performed trials in their entirety. In a real practice setting, the board would have to be completely filled by the client, as well as typically 2 to 4 trials being administered. Also, an important thing to remember is that in our toolkit, only one board was provided, and the test is still able to be administered in this fashion. However, if a clinician were wanting to administer the assessment precisely to the instruction manual, technically 2 boards are required.